Welcome, fellow Illumineers. My name is Raquel, and I am a part of the newly formed group Sunflower Illumineers. We are based out of Kansas, hence sunflowers, to represent our wonderful state. Our group wants to give each Illumineer a place to watch some content for both new players, casual, and those a bit more in the competitive scene. I will be pushing out some videos with basic how-tos and frequently asked questions that will hopefully be answered by the videos. My fellow Illumineers, we will give you tons of options to different content beyond the how-tos, so stay tuned for those videos by the others. A quick note, Disney Lorcana does not have an official rulebook as of right now, but we do have answers to many frequently asked questions from the creators, so I'll do my best to touch base on those. If you have further questions, comments, or feedback, we welcome it all. Please hit the like and subscribe buttons if you would like to see more content. Our first phase will be going over the Disney Lorcana Quick Start Guide. So to all the Illumineers out there, welcome to this wonderful world. Hope to help you in your journey to make this a fun experience so that you can enjoy this super fun and easy game. Illumineers, let's get to it. Trading card game, also known as Lorcana or TCG Lorcana, is a fairly new game to hit the trading card scene. Although new, there is a lot to learn, and hopefully we can go over this guide to give you the basics. To start, Disney Lorcana is a card game where each player makes their own deck before the game starts. The deck consists of a minimum of 60 cards. The goal each Illumineer or player is to be the first player to gain 20 or more lore. There are various ways to do this, but first let's go over this guide and get familiar with the basics, and then we can dive even deeper into the game. The cards. Your Lorcana deck can have a mix of 3 types of cards: characters, actions, and items. Characters can quest, challenge, and some even have special abilities which are indicated on the card. All characters interplay as wet, which means you are not able to use them unless they have a special ability that states otherwise when you first play them. If there is no special ability written on the card, then that card does not have a special ability on its own. The second type of card is items. Items give you special abilities during the game. You may use an item as soon as it comes into play, as long as you are able to cover any ink cost associated with that item. Items stay in play and can be used repeatedly unless specified. The third type of card is actions. Actions give you a one-time advantage and then are discarded. You will place them in your discard pile, revealed for all players to know. Now, there is a specific type of action that is named songs. Songs can be played just like any other action card by paying the ink cost, but there is an additional way to pay for them. Some characters can sing the song for you, so you don't have to pay the ink. Songs will let you know who can sing the card as it's indicated on the card. For example, One Jump Ahead, which is on the screen, states a character with costs 2 or more can exert to sing the song for free. Therefore, if we look at Cruella de Vil, if Cruella de Vil was in play and can be exerted, then you may exert Cruella de Vil, just turn sideways, and pay to play One Jump Ahead. This will be shown in a better way later on if you are still confused on this matter. But this gives you the ability to pay without having to use your ink for that song. Parts of a card. Now let's get a bit more specific on how to read a card. Starting from the top, we are given the amount of ink a card costs to play. So in this instance, Mickey Mouse cost 4 ink, which is indicated at the top left with the number 4. The next section is called Inkwell Icon. Cards with the little Lorcana symbol around their hexagon states that it is inkable. If it is not inkable, it will not have that Lorcana symbol, much like that is not inkable is Dragonfire, which is shown before, that does not have the Lorcana symbol. You may ink 1 card per turn. Name. Characters also have a version name listed below the character's name. Mouse, Wayward Sorcerer, as well as Mickey Mouse, Trumpeter. You may have up to 4 cards with the same name and version of that name in your deck. For example, you can have 4 Mickey Mouse, Wayward Sorcerers in your deck, as well as 4 Mickey Mouse Trumpeters in your deck. Each version of a name is considered a different card. The main name, Mickey Mouse, can be used repeatedly in your deck as long as the version of that name is different. Remember, you can have up to 4 of each name and version in your deck. Classifications. Each character has at least 1 classification, but can have multiple classifications. For example, this Mickey Mouse has 2 classifications, such as Dreamborn and Sorcerer printed on it. These different classifications can trigger certain abilities and effects. This symbol and colored band behind the card indicate the card's ink type. There are 6 ink types, which is indicate the ink key on your right. The 6 different ink types are Amber, Emerald, Sapphire, Amethyst, Ruby, and Steel. Your deck can consist of up to 2 different ink types unless specified by the rules of a tournament or casual play group. In general, you will either have 1 type of ink type in your deck, or you will combine 2 ink types. Most decks are made up of 2 different ink types to get as many powerful cards from each type to create the most powerful deck. Next, abilities and effects. Not all cards have special abilities or effects. Of course, read your card so that you know whether a card does have an ability and when you can use it. Some cards even have 2 abilities. Pay attention, as that may be how you create your powerful decks, is by combining all of these different abilities and or effects to trigger off of each other. Read your cards so that you are aware of those abilities and effects. Next part only applies to characters, as indicated on here, only on characters. All characters have strength, willpower, and a section where lore value is indicated. The strength indicator, which is a symbol that looks very similar to a sun with 8 points, is how much damage your character deals during a challenge. The next part is willpower,
which is indicated by a shield-looking symbol. This is how much damage it takes to banish the character from play. This could also be considered kind of your hit points, your life. If your character is dealt damage equal to or exceeding your character's willpower, your character is banished, which means he will go to your discard pile. The last section on here is lore value. That is the diamond-ish looking symbol which indicates how much lore you gain when the character quests. Last note about all cards is that all cards have a rarity symbol at the bottom. On here is a rarity key. Now, you have common, uncommon, rare, super rare, legendary, and not indicated on this rarity key is enchanted. Each set has a number of enchanted cards. Rare, super rare, legendary, and enchanted cards are harder to obtain than common or uncommon cards when you are opening up packs of this game. Therefore, those cards are typically in higher demand as there will be less of them in the market. Setting up and playing the game. Moving on to playing the game. Now, as indicated, each player needs their own deck. You will also need damage counters and a way to track how much lore you have. Players can use anything from the damage counters that come with certain boxes to track damage to using the 6-sided dice to keep track of damage on each character. Keeping track of lore. There are lore counters that come with certain sealed product. There are also playmats that have a lore counter on them. You can use the Lorcana app, which has a lore counter embedded into it, or you can even use a 20-sided dice to keep track of lore. There is no right or wrong way, as long as you and your opponent can both see damage as well as lore numbers. So, shuffle your deck, ensure your lore tracker is set to 0, decide who is going to go first. This can be done by rolling a dice, rock, paper, scissors, or any other method you want to use to determine on who goes first. Draw your 7 cards, which is considered your starting hand. Now, you can look at your cards, but you cannot look at anyone else's hands. Each player can alter their starting hand one time, beginning with the first player. Typically, this is where you will decide if your starting hand has too many uninkables or too many high-cost cards, or you don't have your ideal starting hand. Once you have decided, you can put any number of cards from your hand onto the bottom of your deck without revealing them. Then draw cards until your hand has 7 cards again. You are only allowed to do this once. Example: I have my 7 cards, but I have 4 cards that I do not want in my starting hand. I would put all 4 of those cards at the bottom of my deck, not revealed, and I would draw 4 more cards. Now, what happens if I don't like those 4 cards? Well, you're simply out of luck, as you cannot return or draw any other cards once you have made your decision. So make sure you choose wisely when making this decision. Now, reshuffle your deck and then the game may begin. In the game, a turn is divided into 2 parts. Each player takes their whole turn before passing the turn to the next player. We'll start with the beginning phase. The beginning phase was starting by number 1, ready. ready your exerted cards by turning them upright. Exerted cards are cards you used last turn, which were turned sideways. 2. Set. Check for effects that happen at the start of your turn and follow their instructions. Read your cards to ensure you are not missing any of your effects. Number 3. Draw. Draw a card from the top of your deck. The first player that starts the game skips this step on their first turn, but otherwise you will always draw a card at the start of your turn. Please make sure you follow each of these beginning phase steps so that you are not penalized by forgetting any of these steps. Ready, set, draw. Moving on to the main phase. Once per turn, you can put a card face down into your inkwell at any time. Additionally, you can take any action listed any number of times in any order you want. So take full advantage of what your cards can do in combination with other effects. You can also do any of the following actions. Play a card, use an item ability, use a character ability that doesn't require you to exert them, take an action with a card that's been in play since the start of your turn, which would be considered quote-unquote dry. These include anything from questing, challenging an opponent's exerted character, or using an ability that requires them to be exerted. Remember, your cards are either going to be in the ready position or exerted. Once a card is exerted, turned sideways, you can't exert it again during your turn until it's been ready by a game rule or card effect. To ready a card, simply turn it back upright. Ready all of your exerted cards at the beginning of your turn. Inkwell. Now, how do we get ink to play our cards? Pretty simple. You may put a card from your hand into your inkwell once per turn. The card you choose must have the inkwell icon in the upper left corner. This card must be revealed to your opponent so that they can confirm that the card is inkable. Place it face down in your inkwell as ink. Every card in your inkwell represents one ink no matter the cost of the card. Choose wisely. Cards put into your inkwell stay there for the rest of that game. You are not allowed to check or swap out cards once you have inked a card. Playing a card. Playing a card just means taking it from your hand and putting it face up onto the table once you have paid the ink cost. You will exert that many cards in your inkwell. Example: Captain Hook cost 1 ink. Therefore, you would need to exert 1 ink from your inkwell to play this card during your turn. You would turn one of your ink sideways or exerted in order to play Captain Hook onto the table. You play a character card, put it on the table above your inkwell. Characters interplay in the ready position, but you can't do anything with them until your next turn. You need to wait for their ink to dry. When you play an item card, put it on the table above your inkwell. Unlike characters, you can use items right away. When you play an action or song action, do what the card tells you to do, and then put the card in your discard pile. Always put cards into your discard pile face up so everyone can see them. Now, let's move on to questing. To quest with one of your characters, exert them and gain lore equal to their lore value. Remember, you can't quest with the character the same turn you play. Questing may be how you win the game, but sometimes you need to slow your opponents down. You may declare one of your characters to challenge an opponent's exerted character. You can't challenge a ready character. Both characters in a challenge deal damage. You would determine the damage each character takes by the strength of each character. Put that many damage counters on the other character. A character is banished when they have damage counters on them that reach or exceed their willpower. Put that character card in its player's discard pile. For example, here we have Captain Hook and Donald Duck. Let's say you have Captain Hook. He has 3 strength and 4 willpower. Donald Duck has 2 strength and 3 willpower. Alright, so you exert your Captain Hook to challenge Donald Duck. Now, your Captain Hook would deal 3 damage to Donald Duck. Simultaneously, Donald Duck would deal 2 damage to your Captain Hook. Therefore, Donald Duck would take 3 damage, meaning he would then be banished as he only has 3 willpower. So Donald Duck would be banished and would then be placed in that player's discard pile. Captain Hook receives 2 damage. Now, he would be given 2 damage counters, and he would survive or stay in play, but would be in danger should your opponent challenge Captain Hook. And if he takes 2 or more damage later, he would then also be banished. Damage counters do not get taken away at the end of your turn. Damage counters stay in play unless there is a specific ability or effect that would take away that damage. Using abilities. Many items and characters have abilities you can use during your turn, and only during your turn. These normally affect other cards in play. Cards in a player's deck, discard, hand, or inkwell are not considered in play, so they aren't affected by other cards unless the card says otherwise. If a card ability has a cost that appears before its effect, with the 2 separated by a dash, that cost might include an exerted cost and an ink cost. Text that explain the cost or a combination of either of these. You must pay every part of an ability's cost in order to play the ability. Remember, you can't use the abilities of a character you played this turn. So, for example, we have Dinglehopper and Beast's Mirror. Now, an item can always be exerted upon play. So, with Dinglehopper, it states on there that strengthening hair is the ability, and the cost of that is to exert it, which is to turn it sideways. And when you do, You can remove up to 1 damage from chosen character. Now, in contrast, Beast's Mirror, which is also an item, has an ability called Show Me. Now, this cost looks like you would have to exert it, which tap it sideways, as well as paying 3 ink. So, in order to use the Show Me ability, you would need to exert your Beast's Mirror, pay 3 ink, and if you have no cards in your hand, you would draw a card. So you must pay attention to what your abilities can do and the cost of those abilities. Ending the game. The first player to reach 20 lore or more wins. If your deck runs out of cards, you lose the next time you would have to draw. Although that is a very unlikely scenario, it is a scenario you need to be aware of. So to recap, beginning phase, ready, set, draw. Main phase, choose as many as you like, in any order. Once per turn, you may add a card to your inkwell. You may play a card. You may activate an item. You may play a character's ability that doesn't require it to be exerted, with a character that was in play during the set step, quest, or challenge an exerted character, or use an ability that requires it to be exerted. Remember the key components: cost, your inkwell, strength, willpower, and lore of your character cards. Lorcana is a fun game. You get to choose which characters you want, which abilities you include, and the strategies are endless. There are different ways of building a deck. The easiest way is to swap out cards from an existing deck. There are starter decks in each of the sets, starting with 3 in set 1 and 2 in each of set 2 and 3. You may pick up any one of those starter decks and start trying it out and see what method works for you. You must remember, each Lorcana deck must follow these rules. Your deck must have 60 cards in it. Your deck cannot contain more than 4 copies of any single card. Example, you can't have more than 4 copies of Elsa Snow Queen in your deck, but you can have different versions of a character card count as different cards. So, for example, you can have 4 copies of Elsa Snow Queen in your deck, and that doesn't stop you from adding 4 copies of Elsa Queen Regent. Your deck can only contain cards from either 1 or 2 inks. There are many websites that have tons of deck building and strategy tips. As this guide says, you can always check out the DisneyLorcana.com for videos with deck building and strategy tips. Sunflower Illumineers, we will try to give you as many strategy tips as possible as well. So keep in touch, keep watching those videos. Although most games are played with 2-player, Lorcana can be played with 3 or more players. The game rules remain the same, except that at the end of a player's turn, the player to the left takes the next turn. Whenever an ability requires more than 1 player to do something at the same time, start with the player whose turn it is, and then proceed to the left until each affected player has done their action. If you have questions, please place them down in the comments. If you had feedback, we would love to take your feedback. Hopefully this gives you a quick guide into Lorcana Disney card game. Have a great day, guys.